October 1st, 2017, a man named Stephen Paddock was staying in a suite on the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay Casino Resort in Las Vegas. Down below, the Route 91 Harvest Music Festival was taking place. It's an annual country music festival outdoors across the way from Mandalay Bay. It was headlined that year by country star Jason Aldean. Mr. Paddock had not packed like most tourists who go to Las Vegas, and instead in his room he had an arsenal that included 14 assault rifles, most of which had been modified to fire at fully automatic rate. Sometime during the concert, he opened fire on the crowd below. And for the next 10 minutes, the whole scene was just terrifying. The people at the concert did not know who was shooting at them or from where. They thought terrorists had invaded the concert. People were hiding, behind tables and garbage cans, not knowing that he was looking down and picking them off. People were trying to get out, but the place was fenced in. They were getting trampled. And it took the police 10 minutes to find him and stop him. And in those 600 seconds that ensued, he fired nearly 2 bullets per second the entire time, more than 1,100 shots in total. And at the end of the 10 minutes, he had shot 480 people, 58 of whom died, and the rest of whom were shot, and another 400 were injured in just the general chaos. It's almost 900 victims. It was the worst mass shooting in United States history. And it's impossible to imagine what that was like without having been there, which I wasn't. But I do imagine that there was a lot of screaming, screams of fear, screams of terror, and screams of pain. It was just a horrible thing. 9 days later, people in Las Vegas were screaming for a very different reason, and that's what really interests me. You have to realize that at this time, Las Vegas, a city of over 2 million people, so this time being only 4 years ago, Las Vegas was the largest city in the United States that did not have a professional sports team in any of the big 4 major sports, the NFL, Major League Baseball, hockey, the NBA. They had just gotten their first team, a hockey franchise, the Las Vegas Golden Knights. And it was a really big deal. I mean, I think it was a bigger deal than a new hockey team would have been in any other city in the country, simply for the reason that it was all of Las Vegas professional sports. And the Knights were scheduled to play their first game 9 days after this horrific mass shooting. And in that period, the city was, unhinged, as you might expect, really traumatized. The Knights players went around. They went to blood drives and thanked people, encouraged people to give blood. They visited shooting victims in the hospitals, and pretty much every hospital in the city was full of victims. They visited first responders. They shook hands. They, just tried to do everything that they could to, sort of raise the spirits of the city. And when they started playing, they won their first game. And it was a big deal because expansion teams in sports don't typically do well. The Las Vegas Golden Knights were a 500-1 long shot, comprised entirely of players other teams had discarded. And they won their second game. And they won their third game. And when they won their third game, it set the NHL record for an expansion team wins. And they won 8 of their 9 first games, also a record. They never left first place for the entire season from day one. They ended up going to the 5th game of the Stanley Cup Finals and losing. So second, which is pretty good for 500-1. But I personally have spent more time in Las Vegas than any other city that I haven't lived in. I've written on everything you can imagine in Las Vegas, including skiing, which surprises people. And I've been there more than 50 times. And I know the city pretty well, and I know a lot of people there. So I was working on this book about sports fans, and I went out to see it for myself, what was going on. And I asked around for people who might know, people who would be willing to talk to me who had been at the concert. And I got directed to a few people, one of whom was a gentleman named Nick Rabone, who had been shot in the chest. And these assault rifles are military weapons designed specifically to kill people and inflict maximum damage. So Nick realized he was very, very lucky to have survived being shot in the chest during this event. And he spent 10 nights in the hospital and was released. And 2 days later, he went back to the Strip, only a few blocks from where the concert had happened, back into the crowds, this time to a Golden Knights game. And he told me about how, he's 100% sure that, it really helped him personally, psychologically, but also the city. He told me about neighbors talking to neighbors they had never talked to, people talking to strangers, just the whole city coming together. And I spoke, when I was out there, I spoke to everybody I could about this, cab drivers, bartenders. I spoke to the mayor. I spoke to Knights officials, and they all told this same story of the city, pulling together, healing. The mayor told me it was like a phoenix rising from the ashes. And then I spoke to a woman named Jessica Duran, and Jessica had been at the concert also. She was in a temporary structure that was used as like one of the VIP suites. Shots blew out the windows, broken glass. She crawled out. She managed to finally escape through a hole in the fence. She was shot at. Friends of hers were shot. She was terrified. She was traumatized. And she told me that afterwards, for a couple of weeks, she was afraid to leave her house. And she was not a hockey fan. She had never been to a hockey game. She liked basketball. And but a lot of her friends had season tickets, and they invited her to go to the Knights game at the beginning. And she said, no, I don't want to go back into the crowds. I don't want to go back to the Strip. And then they invited her, and she said no again. And she told me about how, she saw all this buzz on the news and in the papers and on TV, about the Knights and everything that they were doing. And, finally she said, to paraphrase, I realized I just had to sort of take control of my life. And I saw there was something special going on. So I said yes. And it was like the 5th or 6th game of the season. She went to her first ever hockey game. And then she told me that at that first game, everything clicked for her. She realized she was supposed to be there. It was, her moment of healing. And despite never having been to a hockey game and not really knowing the rules, she would go 50 more times that season. She bought tickets to the playoffs and went to LA to see them when they went to the playoffs. And, just told me this story about basically how hockey saved her life. And it wasn't just her story. It was a story I heard over and over everywhere I went in Las Vegas. And, at the time I was researching, this book on sports fandom and how sports impacts our life. And a lot of the non-fans that I have spoken to say, watching sports TV, it's a waste of time. You're sitting on the couch. And if you went to Las Vegas, like I did, and you talked to people and you thought about those screams at the concert, those screams of terror, of pain, of fear. And then for, the next several months, Las Vegas screaming more and more and more in joy and happiness and victory and redemption, then you realize that you can't shrug sports off as unimportant. That was sort of my aha moment in my book. I came back from that trip, realizing how vital it was to the fabric of our society, and to sit next to your neighbor and to go out and do something. And so from screams to screams, it was an interesting journey, and I think it's an important one. And I appreciate you taking the time to listen to me tonight. So thanks a lot and enjoy the show.